This looks like a solar panel, but it's much more than that. It's a water tap that doesn't require any connection neither to an electrical grid nor to a water network to deliver enough safe and mineralized water for 2 people 365 days per year. Well, it does so unless it's freezing for too long, raining too much, the sky is too cloudy, or the unit breaks down. But in all other cases, it's an amazing engineering feat. You're literally creating potable water from thin air. When billions of people worldwide don't have access to safe water, that's a feature that could potentially open a tremendous market, while, simply put, doing good, which is exactly the type of opportunities that investors like Breakthrough Energy Ventures, Microsoft's Climate Innovation Fund, Duke Energy, or even BlackRock couldn't miss. This is how, through 4 rounds of funding between 2018 and 2022, Source Global, the company behind these almost magical hydropanels, raised $270 million, which makes it one of the 3 most funded water tech companies of all times, some even estimating that their Series D may have made them a unicorn.
But you know what I mean?
If my grandmother had wheels, she would have been a bike. It doesn't make any sense what you said.
Meanwhile, Cody Friesen, who founded Source Global in 2015, has collected nearly every possible prize and accolade there is, from MIT's Innovators Under 35 to the CES Innovation Awards, through Bloomberg's New Energy Pioneers, Fast Company's Most Innovative Companies, and World-Changing Ideas, the John McNulty Prize, the Lemelson MIT Prize, Newsweek's Tech Innovator, or the Henry Crown Fellowship, which all leads us to the 12th March 2024, when Cody sits along his COO Stephen Bryden in Penang, Malaysia, for the inauguration of their new production plant, staffed with about 400 employees, and expected to ramp up the company's output, be closer to the Asian and Middle East markets Source was targeting as part of its expansion plans, and lower the unit costs. Except nothing happened as expected, and 12 months later, Source published its last post on social media and went silent, seemingly forever, without much of an explanation. What happened here? Essentially, 3 things. Source ran out of cash and failed to raise even a down round. They encountered quality issues that snowballed and worsened the cash issue, and they tried and failed to pivot, which, as you'll see at the end, now creates a very weird situation that makes them a walking dead, yet potentially making more money than they ever did. Let's start with the cash, and let's be clear, what Source encountered is pretty normal for a venture capital-backed company. The idea is that you'll try to grow faster than you naturally can by using VC money as your nitro for your engine, while hoping your car doesn't explode before you finish assembling it. This is exactly why Source raised $22 million in a Series A in early 2018, then another $20 million in a Series B that same year, $50 million in a Series C in 2020, and $130 million in a Series D in 2022. Fundraising milestones are usually praised as a very positive sign for a company because it means you've convinced an investor to back you, and it usually raises the valuation of your company, but it's also an indicator that you've been looking for cash. No founder gives up equity just for fun, so you usually back up your fundraisers with the promise of achieving a significant milestone. In 2018, Source raised on the promise that they would, and I quote, leapfrog infrastructure just as cell phones do. The idea was that if piping water to people demanded too much investment, another way was to radically decentralize the production of water, bringing it directly to everyone in need without requiring any pre-existing connection to anything. As outlandish as the claim is, and as vocal as non-believer may have been, Source delivered on that framework. They made hydropanel donations to Puerto Rico after it got hit by Hurricane Maria, and it worked. They brought hydropanels to the middle of nowhere in Australia or Syria, and it worked. They delivered hydropanels to pediatric wards in Jamaican hospitals, and guess what? It worked! At that stage, nobody expected the panels to be long-term reliable or even affordable. What was expected from Source was to deliver a proof of concept, and they did. Now, it would have been even more of a total home run if Flint, Michigan had taken up their offer to deploy up to 1,000 hydropanels as a partial solution to their water crisis. I mean, the most mediatized water issue of the time in the north of the US, where everybody would expect them to struggle because of the weather. That would have been beyond all their expectations, except the economics and the physics came in the way. Nevertheless, Source compensated for that near miss with the rollout of 10 hydropanels in Neom, Saudi Arabia, which concluded that funding cycle with a bold success. Proof of concept mission achieved. This leads us to the second cycle with their $50 million raise in 2020. Now, the promise was to scale global installations of source Hydropanels and launch direct-to-consumer initiatives beyond North America. And again, they succeeded. Yes, naysayers like Christopher Gasson called them an egregious waste of money, and crazy analysts like Rhys Owen said they were way overvalued. But what do Rhys and Christopher know about water tech? Don't answer that question. I need you to suspend your disbelief for now. Because yet again, in that cycle, it wasn't about technology or business model. After the proof of concept, it was about the proof of market. And with, for real, over 2 billion people in the world without access to safe water and over 2 million in the US alone, proof of market wasn't that impossible of a task. So again, Source did well. They deployed Hydropanels in the Navajo Nation, entered the Philippines, expanded in Colombia, built at the Red Sea, gained references in overall 54 countries, and what probably was their greatest achievement at the time, they came on my podcast microphone to claim they would soon be producing the cheapest water on Earth.
Our goal is to become by far and away the cheapest source of potable water on the planet.
Which sounds like a plan. Meanwhile, they also planted seeds for future growth by bottling their water as a luxury good, which on top of the proof of concept, started raising the awareness and building the brand. The only piece of the puzzle that was still lacking was revenue. In 2022, they projected $8.8 million. Don't get me wrong, if I were to ever make that money out of my bootstrapped part-time water media, I'd be over the moon. But as a company that, at that stage, has already raised nearly $140 million in dilutive and non-dilutive capital, that's not much. Which is why they went for the last stage of the rocket with their Series D in 2022, raising $130 million. This time, the plan was to accelerate scale, which is doable with money, to further build their commercial, community, and consumer offerings globally, which, again, is doable with money, and to progress towards producing the safest, most reliable, and lowest delivered cost drinking water on the planet. And that doesn't only require money, it also requires the laws of thermodynamics to stop existing, and that's a tough endeavor. As I explained to you in my video on Google's failed attempt at making water from air, there are some laws of physics that make it hard for atmospheric water generation to go below some fixed cost floors. And if you still want to achieve that, you will start to have to cut corners. So I'll come back to the cash struggles, but I need to take on the quality issues before. Because if you remember Google's conclusions, they didn't deem it impossible to become somewhat cost-competitive long-term with water from air. They estimated that it would take a very specific industrial expertise, though, to cut costs enough to become affordable. Not the cheapest water there is, but affordable, granted you're far enough from centralized infrastructure. And in that bracket, Source was not starting in the best position. I mean, the second thing that people usually remember when you mention Source, after Christopher Gasson calling them an egregious waste of money, is a 7-year-old YouTube video by Thunder Foods called Zero Mass Water Busted. Yes, Zero Mass Water is the former name of Source, which triggered jokes in that video's comments like, exactly as advertised, produces zero mass of water. The main point Thunder Foods makes is that at $4,500 per household, which would be the price for 2 Hydropanels and their installation on your rooftop, let's say in Los Angeles, you could have a tanker truck deliver you the same amount of water those units will produce in their 10-year lifetime, coming from the other end of the US, let's say from New York's famous unfiltered water, and that would still cost you 5 times less. So to hit its milestone of progressing towards the lowest delivered cost for water on the planet, suffice to say, Source had quite some cost-cutting to do. But going down such a cost-cutting path has consequences. First, as a US employer, Source started getting a bad rap among its workers. One wrote that benefits were awful, worst health coverage, no retirement plans, and low level of paid time off, which could be a disgruntled employee if it were only one, but the same comment comes back quite often. As long as the job was a mission, bringing water in distressed areas, employees could be mission-driven, embracing the startup culture and enjoying building the rocket ship. But now that scaling and cutting costs were on the horizon, it feels like from the dozens of reviews I compiled, the atmosphere and culture changed, making it hard to swallow a below-average paycheck. But Source had an agenda. They had to find cost savings on the product, which leads them to this 12th March of 2024 I alluded alluded to in the introduction, when they're inaugurating their brand new plant in Bayan Lepas, Malaysia. By then, it's been nearly 4 years that the company is working on building a production facility in the country, and even if the inauguration is happening in 2024, in reality, the plant has been operating in some art and fashion for roughly a year. And it's not a small one. With 400 employees, it is sized to deliver at scale. Unfortunately, if Source was already getting a bad rap as an employer in the US, it still scored 3 stars on Glassdoor at home. But overseas, that rating drops to 1.8. And there the main issues that surface are not salary, but order books, turnover, and as a consequence, quality. In an effort to cut costs, Source tried to move to as many cheap parts and materials as possible. And I'm not saying that to blame them, it's exactly what Google recommended in their own conclusions, but succeeding at low cost and cheap parts that still deliver is a skill. And hearing from former employees on both ends of the Pacific, that didn't go smoothly, with lots of decisions overruled, plans constantly changing, and a good bunch of indecision coming from the top. In a hand manufacturing intensive endeavor like assembling the Hydropanels, the regular layoffs and hiring cycles at the Malaysian facility didn't help build consistency, resulting in quality drops while costs remained high. Still, in hope of realizing the economies of scale expected from a large facility, Source had to sell and fill its order books. Yet to do so, they had to start overselling what the product was capable of, especially when it came to reliability and durability. Remember the 10-year lifetime Thunderfoot mentioned in his video back in 2018? Well, a couple of years later, Source quietly changed it to 5-year commitment to support. And unfortunately, it seems those panels needed that support. For instance, Source had first installed 2 Hydropanels in Allensworth, California in 2021. Then in 2022, a philanthropic organization acquired 1,000 more of those panels to deploy across the Central Valley as a solution for arsenic pollution in groundwater, and 40 more panels got deployed in Allensworth. But just 2 years later, the local press reports on the fact that some of the panels still work, while many residents remove the Hydropanels from their yards because they weren't working and were taking up space. That's just 2 years in, and the majority of the rollouts have broken down while the maintenance crew doesn't exist. As Source admits, there's been high turnover on the team. Meanwhile, Allensworth is only the mediatized tip of the iceberg. Source customers complain all over the internet about fan failures, battery breakages, remote monitoring that tries to remote monitor without sensors, long delivery times for spare parts, stranded broken panels, poor or absent service, leading Redditors to agree on this advice: do not, I repeat, do not get them, save yourself the trouble. And it seems like customers followed that advice. In turn, the Malaysia facility never saw the expected thousands of outputs and was instead put on hold, and remains so to this date. Beyond Source's seemingly internal turmoil, there's honestly also a market rationale. A high-priced product calls for high-income countries, and high-income countries usually don't have that many people fully off-grid. I mean out of the electrical grid. Look at this map by Visual Capitalist and you'll see that OECD countries have more or less a 100% electrical coverage, which means even if you were a hardcore believer in water from air, you could get a cheaper, simpler, more reliable unit that uses an electrical plug. So checkmate, Source. Not just yet, because yes, things don't look great at that stage, but every time they needed cash over the years, they were always able to raise, right? So they might just be one cash injection away from finding a new direction for the business, and we'll see in a minute that they had ideas. First, the information was diffuse. I mean, I'm talking with water investors on a regular basis. It's a small world and Source is a big fish, so they couldn't stay in stealth mode for too long. And the rumor started spreading that Source was raising a down round. The idea of a down round is that a company raises new funds at a lower valuation than its previous funding round, which essentially means that the company is now worth less on paper than it formerly was. So new investors also pay less per share than earlier investors did. This is of course bad for existing investors twice because their shares lose value first, but they also get diluted as the company issues more shares at the lower price. Yet, the simple fact that this rumor surfaced already tells you several things. First, it means Source probably failed to raise a bridge, which is a smaller pocket of money you raise for short-term needs, usually at a flat valuation from your previous round and usually from your existing investors. Source's investors have deep pockets, be it Breakthrough Energy Ventures, Microsoft's Climate Innovation Fund, or BlackRock, so the fact that they did not want to bridge Source's cash troubles is already an indicator. Then a down round is something investors are reluctant to hop on because, especially in water endeavors, you rarely invest alone, so you need to have good relationships with other investors in your space. And while a down round can be an opportunity to get in on a company that just has a hiccup at a lower cost, you're always stepping on the toes of existing investors who can, in turn, be a bit sore at you, which can have consequences in the future. And third and last thing this rumor tells us is that usually when I hear of something like that, either it results in a press release within a few weeks announcing the round, or it is a really negative signal for the company because it means they were not able to close. And for months, it was crickets, which is not a good sign. Fast forward to April 2025, when this document surfaces, an SEC filing for a new private offering by Source Global aiming to raise $75 million, but that at the time of the filing had only sold $19.3 million. And that's a gap. But the gap is only one of two information in that document. Yes, it shows that indeed Source is struggling to raise, but it also gives a new related person as the number one mentioned in the document, with Al Daya, at the time officially Chief Corporate Development Officer at Source. So far, these top spots, the one with the Executive Officer cross-ticked in the SEC filing for Source, had always been Cody Friesen, but this time, it not only wasn't him, but it was nowhere to be found in the document. What happens to Cody? I reached out to him at the time, but didn't hear back. I contacted Source without more of an answer, and his LinkedIn profile still showed him as the CEO. So I figured he might have been busy with Source's pivot. Because that's the third and last big dimension to cover here. In 2023, Source acquired Proud Source Water, a sustainable bottled spring water brand, in what may sound like a quite strange move. Their idea was to launch a new beverage brand called Sky Water, or to be truthful to their actual name, Sky No clue how to pronounce that, so let's just say water if you allow me. By mid-2024, Source told us a bit more about it, revealing that it would be a canned water sourced from atmospheric water generation, or said differently, hydropanel water, with 2 hydropanel farms set to be built at Proud Source's bottling locations in Mackay, Idaho, and Marianna, Florida. And while the Idaho farm never got built, you can actually see the Florida one on Google Street View. This is the Proud Source plant on the left, and this here is the hydropanel farm. I tried to send someone to make images of it, but it turned out it was too far from Tallahassee for someone to jump in a car on a stranger's suggestion, so I had to resolve on counting panels on Google Maps, and I'd estimate there are 3,500 hydropanels in this farm. And as impressive as it looks, even if we take the most optimistic end of the production envelope Source gives for a single hydropanel in Florida, we're talking of a daily production of about 17.5 cubic meters of water, which makes for a maximum production of 35,000 cans of Sky Water per day, to be sold at a price of $12 for an 8-pack.
It's a bargain.
Even if we skip the cognitive dissonance of having spent years telling everyone that your technology would be a direct replacement for bottled water, and for the better, only to use it to bottle water and market cans of water, there are strange bets taken in this move. I mean, an industry average shows that the raw water in bottled water represents less than 0.001% of its retail price. In Source's Sky Water case, it would be more about 7% if we consider the hydropanels will last 5 years, and up to 18% if we consider they won't survive more than 2 years. And taking a brand new bottled water off the ground isn't easy either. killer, as it's a space crowded with titans, and beverage startups have one of the highest failure rates across all sectors, as 90% of them failed within the first 2 years, only 3% ever reached $10 million in sales, and 80% never even reach 1 million. So why did Source venture into that mess? Well, you know what? It's maybe less crazy than it sounds, and that's actually a direct page from the Xerox book. When Xerox introduced the 914 copying machine in the early 60s, that was maybe an impressive technological marvel, but also an expensive one, leading sales to flatline and Xerox to wonder what to do about it. The result is history. They turned the machines into a fleet they built for themselves, leased them out and charged per copy, and customers bought printed sheets of paper, not expensive machinery. This, in turn, generated volume that enabled Xerox to iterate and further develop the machine while reaching scale effect. This is also somewhat what Google is doing with Waymo, SpaceX with Starlink, or Amazon with its warehouse robotics. So in itself, the idea of building hydropanel farms to sell canned water could enable being break-even-ish on the beverage end, while creating volume for the hydropanel factories and R&D iterations on their inner parts, as Source would become the main operator of its own product. But it still requires Sky Water products to take off, which would require a good bunch of marketing money, hands of cash, and as we've seen, Source doesn't have cash. Worse, I mentioned the cognitive dissonance of going for bottled water when you've been battling bottled water for years, but it's not only a cognitive dissonance, it's also outside of Source's main backer's investment thesis. Breakthrough Energy Ventures, for instance, wants to decarbonize the world, not to put more trucks on the road to deliver water cans, even if you can recycle them. And this is the context in which, this June 2025, Cody Friesen reappeared on LinkedIn with 4 words: "I've left Source," followed by an explanation as to what's happening with the company. No, followed by a video of him converting his KTM motorcycle into an electric one. At the time, he seemed to be the only Source executive moving on, but more and more as people updated their profiles, it turned out that their VP North America, Chief Revenue Officer, Chief Corporate Development Officer, VP Global Development Partnerships, and okay, I'm not gonna list them all, just look at all these green open to work circles on Source employees' profile pictures. They all seemingly left between March and May 2025, indicating that something was over, with the Source page posting a last time about the Navajo Nation and then going silent. So that's where we stand. But is it really over? I've asked around for comments and nobody replied, so I'm left with conjectures. But what I can see is that while hydropanels are out of stock and Sky Water is out of stock, ostensibly forever, you can still order ProudSource water. Now, I would believe though that even if your ProudSource bottle comes from Florida, it would not come from the Hydropanels, as that would breach the ProudSource promise of natural alkaline spring water. Still, ProudSource water being in business and seemingly break-even-ish is probably the closest to profitability the Source empire has ever been. And if they're B Corp certified, a 35-employee boutique survives the test of time, it might, for real, be the best cash cow Source ever had, even if a tiny one, quite far from the aspiring cheapest source of water on Earth empire they envisioned. As for Source itself, I see that Stephen Bryden is still mentioned as Chief Operating Officer, and despite being active on LinkedIn, didn't update his profile to mention he's left, so the best I can assume at this stage is that he's the one tasked with closing the lights when he'll be out. Finally, I don't want to dance on Source's grave, as many will, I have no doubt. Yes, there was a consensus among the water world that what they were building made little sense, or let's say, needed you to suspend your disbelief quite high. But in the same time, the point of use / point of entry segment of the water market is the fastest growing of them all, and at that level, good marketing and positioning can solve a lot of single issues and provide real benefits in the B2C segments, even if it apparently doesn't make sense at a zoomed out scale. And beyond that, I've said it a lot, but I will say it once more, water entrepreneurship is an unreasonable endeavor for a full set of reasons that's too long to explain just in this conclusion, but subscribe to my newsletter and you'll hear more about it. So I have nothing but respect for what the Source team tried to take off. It didn't work, and that's life. I hear Cody Friesen when he writes that a builder's gotta build, and I know he's got a new endeavor cooking, so I'll watch for it, and if any new development appears on that front or on the Source story, I'll keep you posted. Now, if that kind of story is of interest, check out my analysis of Energia's path, Different animal, but fascinating as well. And if you've liked this one, don't leave without hitting the like or subscribe buttons, and I'll see you next time. Beautiful, but maybe a bit noisy to record. Apologies for that.